All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Patrick, and we're here with Kevin Vost. Am I saying that correctly?
You sure are.
Okay. And Kevin is an author, and he's written many books. And one of the books is the right here, the Saint Albert the Great, and it's a fantastic book. I've been reading through it, and it's just so amazing, filled with lots of great detail about Saint Albert. And just a little about me. My name is Patrick Pulis. I am the founder of Saint of the Month subscription box, where people get each month a different. They learn about a different saint. And this October, we're learning about Saint Albert the Great, and that's why we've invited Kevin here to speak a little bit about who Saint Albert was, and let our all of our listeners know about this great saint that holds the title of the Great. So um, yeah, so I'll turn the table to you if you want to introduce yourself and give us a little introduction of who Saint Albert was.
Sure, sure. Thanks so much for having me on with you, Patrick, too. And thanks for holding up that cover. I know we're not supposed to judge books by their covers, but that's one of my favorites. And I actually got a chance to meet the young man who designed it. So thank you for that. But yeah, I'm Kevin Vost. I live in Springfield, Illinois. One thing, I write books for Catholic publishers. I have 18 of them out now. I was trained as a psychologist and did work in the disability evaluation field for years in college teaching part-time. I was raised a Catholic in my late teens, read the wrong kind of philosophy, and considered myself an atheist for the next 25 years. At age 43, through a wonderful series of events, including reading the writings of one of St. Albert's greatest student, St. Thomas Aquinas, that brought me back to the church. So now for the last 14 years, I've been back to Christ in the church because Thomas taught me that all those arguments that the atheists made that drew me away, I had no idea they were answered so well so many centuries ago by some of our greatest saints. So it's been my pleasure since I came back to the church in 2004 to write a variety of books, including this biography of St. Albert the Great, who is Thomas Aquinas' teacher.
Great, great. So Saint Albert is also known as a teacher of everything there is to know. Now, explain what that means. He was, from what we know from reading the first few chapters, he had a kind of interest in a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah, he sure did. And he's often kind of, out overcome by, or he's often cast in the shadow of that great student Thomas Aquinas, because Thomas was so absolutely brilliant. But Albert himself was so knowledgeable that during his lifetime he was routinely referred to as the Great because he was so knowledgeable. That's why people like Thomas Aquinas sought him out as their professor. And he was knowledgeable in just a wide variety of subjects. Now, I'll give a little context here. He lived in the 13th century from approximately the year 1200. We often don't know the exact date of birth of people from that time period, but we know he died on November 15th, the year 1280. He would go on to become Thomas Aquinas' teacher, among other things, but he was like the greatest scientist of his day. So he's now considered a patron saint of scientists. He's also considered one of the few dozen great doctors or teachers of the church. So he's really a remarkable man. But in his time, as I said, he was a scientist. He wrote like over 30 books on natural sciences. Like he wrote a book on animals. He wrote a book on vegetables. He did scientific experiments. So really a man of broad interest because he realized that the things of creation in some way reflect back on God. So he marveled at the simple things, at plants, at squirrels, at fish, and the different ways that they show us the glory of God. They reflect the wonder of God. So a magnificent scientist. Also, he was a wonderful philosopher and, of course, a theologian. He wrote commentaries on books of the Bible, wrote extensively on the Blessed Mother. So just a truly remarkable man. And so people at his time said he was kind of like the last man who knew all there was to know. His learning was just amazingly extensive. Sometimes I compare Albert to like a broad searchlight, that's searching out knowledge everywhere. And his student, Thomas Aquinas, I compare sometimes to a laser beam. He's not quite as broad as Albert, but he has amazing penetration. So between the two of them, they make a very amazing combination.
Okay, great. And tell us a little bit about his love for the Virgin Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and basically he was a Dominican, and tell us the story of how the our Blessed Mother kind of appeared to him and told him to continue to be a Dominican, because did he go? He did go through some sort of phase or some sort of dream that kind of scared him whether he was going to be a Dominican. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. There's a story that early on in his studies, St. Albert loved natural learning. He loved the sciences. But he was kind of afraid that it might also pull him away from Christ. And it's also said that he's having a hard time learning. So even though he's a brilliant man, it didn't necessarily come easy. It said that he'd study during the day or study in the evening. By the time he woke up, a lot of it was gone. And it said in a mystical appearance, Mary came to him, the Blessed Mother, with Saints Catherine and Saint Barbara. And Mary asked him, what he wanted from her. And he said that he wanted just a vast fount of human knowledge, but he wanted to make sure it wouldn't pull him away from Christ. So as the story is told, Mary said she would give him this basically unequaled knowledge, but she also said that and it would not draw him from God, but by the end of his life, she said that this knowledge would be removed from him before he died. Then there's another experience he had when he was joining the Dominican order. And here's where he had the dream. He has this a dream that he joined the order, but then it was a big mistake and he had fell away from God. Well, later that day, so he kind of felt good. He thought, well, God's telling me I really shouldn't go this way. Now, later that day, he attends a lecture from Blessed Jordan of Saxony, who was the man who was St. Dominic's successor as the master general or leader of the order. And during the homily, Blessed Jordan said, he warned the young people there. He said, sometimes the devil will appear to people, in their dreams and try to persuade them that they shouldn't join the order because they're not going to persevere and they're going to fall away. So St. Albert was really amazed by this, and he went and talked to Jordan later and said, how did you know, what was going on with my soul? So yes, though Albert was a great man of science, there's all kinds of stories throughout the ages of how Albert had mystical experiences.
Wonderful, wonderful. And St. Albert, like you said a little bit, he didn't have, I guess, a gift for remembering things right away. That it took him a longer time to kind of contemplate or kind of let all these ideas soak in, if you may, like to he didn't get them right away, and so but he wrote about memory, and I know you wrote about memory. Can you tell us a little bit of his what his ideas on memory?
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's one of the things that drew me to St. Albert. I'd read so much about Thomas, I started learning about Albert. Then I realized there'd not been a modern biography just for lay people written about Albert for over 50 years or so. So it really piqued my interest. But yeah, it just so happened that one of my specialty areas in psychology was memory. I did a master's thesis on memory improvement techniques for teenagers. I did doctoral work with Alzheimer's patients who were losing their memory. So one of the many, many areas that Albert examined in depth was memory. In fact, there's a book called the Ad Horennium. It's from about 84 BC. It's the oldest book we have on memory improvement techniques. And Albert the Great himself actually wrote a commentary, line by line, on every bit of that treatise. It's really amazing. So to put it in a nutshell, here's what Albert did with memory here in the 13th century. There was a long tradition of writings about the way human memory works, the nature of memory. And a lot of that came through the great pagan philosopher Aristotle. Mm-hmm. There was also a separate body of literature on practical techniques. How can we improve our memory? That was traced back to the Roman Cicero in the 1st century BC. So one thing that Albert did, he was combined them. He showed how they work together, how they fit together, how they made sense. These memory improvements techniques work because of the nature of our memory and the way that Aristotle laid them out. So he explained that. Now, he also made a very important change to the way these techniques were used. They were originally developed like for orators, public speakers, so you could remember, not word for word your talk, but all the important points as you went through a speech. Albert knew that, but he also said that memory is essential to the Christian virtue of prudence or practical wisdom. And here's why. See, in practical wisdom, we act now to achieve virtuous goals in the future based on the lessons we've learned in the past. So Albert said we should actually train our memories to learn important lessons like the articles of the faith so they can guide our behavior. So he said memory is actually the most important part of prudence or practical wisdom, because we need to know important lessons, remember them in order to act on them. So anyway, Albert, wrote extensively about the value of memory, and he also gave us very practical advice on exactly how to improve our memories. So that's one of the things that I've written about. And in my Albert book, one of the chapters is called Memory Master, where I give some of this background in and show what Albert wrote and give a little exercise showing you how to actually use these techniques.
Wow, that's great. Well, they're going to get all of our subscribers are going to get a little, one of their gifts is on memory, so that's going to come in a couple weeks. So I can't wait for them to get that. So
Right.
yes, so, and I've also personally practiced a little bit of memory castles, and trying to use spatial orientation in your room and trying to connect ideas to it to remember different
Yes.
things. Some people say that's good way to remember grocery lists or things like that. So that's a great way of remembering things. Now, St. Albert wasn't just a scientist and everything, but he was also a bishop, and so, and not only a bishop, but he had to kind of resolve a couple of disputes that were going on in his days, and so. So he had he's also known as a peacemaker. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Maybe about his conflict with, I think it was Bishop Conrad, but to show how St. Albert was a peacemaker.
Yes. In fact, I structure the book in 3 parts that I call thinker, doer, and lover, and looking at the different aspects of Albert as a profound teacher, then as a person like a bishop, a provincial of the Dominican order. He ran the Dominican order in Germany for a time. So he did all these things. And sometimes he was called in as a peacemaker by the Pope or by other groups of people to settle disputes, because remember, he talked about that prudence or practical wisdom. I mean, he wasn't just some lofty, ivory tower person sitting in a university classroom. He got out there in the world and used his practical wisdom to help people. So there's some pretty amazing stories about what was going on in the 13th century with some of the bishops. And remember, at that time, these bishops also had very lofty, powerful temporal authority. They're almost like governors in our time almost, or mayors, depending on the context there. But so there's a few cases where Albert settled disputes, like where archbishops and the people of certain towns in Germany were at each other's throats, even having military action against each other, and they couldn't, find settlements. So they called Albert in to negotiate peace. So he did this several times between bishops and towns, between different and one order of knights and others. So yeah, he was often called in to settle practical disputes because people so respected him, his integrity, and his wisdom.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I've got news that I started a subscription box that is separate from Saint of the Month, and it's actually going to be called Saint Albert Science Crate. And so I'm excited to launch that. It's Saint of the Month is kind of for adults, like to learn about the saints, but Saint Albert Science Box is specifically is geared towards the youth, and creating projects that they'll learn to learn about all kinds of knowledge. And so they'll get a project, but they'll also learn about virtues and how to grow in different virtues. And so so I'm excited to talk, to launch that, and we just launched. And so ever since learning about St. Albert, I've been just really enthusiastic about him and just his many gifted talents and many in a broad range of areas. So I'm excited about that. And well, it's been a pleasure having you on, Kevin. And do you have any other final things to say?
I would just say that I love your St. Albert project. He is a saint for our time. When so many people say this false dichotomy, well, I believe in science, therefore I don't have faith. Yeah. The subtitle of that book is St. Albert, the great champion of faith and reason. He shows how they both intermesh so wonderfully. So I think that's a wonderful service you're providing with those St. Albert boxes.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, thank you for coming on, and we look forward to seeing if you're going to be writing any more books, or to follow buy your books and read them. I know I've got the Irish Saints that you have, and so I'm excited to read more about. You're a very good writer, and I love reading your books. So keep them coming.
I sure will. Of course, your namesake is one of those great Irish saints there, St. Patrick. So,
Yes,
but it's been
yes.
my pleasure to be with you today, Patrick.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and take care, and God bless.
You too.